Okay, welcome everyone to the March 2019 presentation, HR Best Practices webinar series by Thompson Code, myHRgenius. Really appreciate everybody's attendance. I'm sure some people will be rolling in here since we're actually starting on time. So this month is one of my favorite topics. For those of you that listened last month to the webinar, you heard me go on and on about how much I love FMLA, at least the topic. And so this month we are going to have an intro to FMLA. I know this is going to be rudimentary for many of you, and for a lot of HR people, FMLA, I wouldn't say this is going to be a 101 on FMLA, but FMLA as a general topic is not, the easiest. It's not the easiest of the legal compliance issues that HR people face. So FMLA is just in and of itself, I think, slightly complicated or more complex. Anyway, so even a 101 on FMLA is a little, it could be challenging at times. There's going to be a lot to talk about today, and then I've split it so that this month in March, we are going to talk about FMLA for beginners, do an overview. There's a lot more we could always talk about. So, definitely feel free to give me a call to talk about any issues that you might have. And then next month, we are going to talk about FMLA, more advanced issues on FMLA. So we're going to talk about intermittent leave. We're going to talk about, the medical certifications and contesting those. Just a number of issues that we're going to talk about. Key employees as well, what we need to know about with that. So anyway, that's going to be next month. This month, we're going to do as much basics on FMLA as possible. And like I said, it's absolutely one of my favorite topics. People around here in the office, I think, have been a little annoyed with me being super excited about talking about this today. This is me. It's a fairly recent picture, so I'm still getting used to it. And but there it is. So that's me. I'm an HR certified specialist, HR attorney, and that's what I do. So I'm doing these presentations. And we've been doing these presentations for this HR Best Practices series is going on, like 7 years that we've been doing these webinars and monthly, lunch and learn type of presentations. If you are unfamiliar with the myHRgenius program, you're welcome to take a look at it at myHRgenius.co. And it's a very unique, one-of-a-kind, all-you-can-eat HR service. A lot of you might already be on the program, and thank you for your membership. For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, there are multiple tiers, but legal HR hotline to be able to call about any HR legal issues that you want for $79 is a pretty phenomenal, opportunity. So I would invite any of you to contact me with questions or, our 1-800 number if you have any questions on that or send emails to us. The package itself, it comes with the hotline. That's the most valuable part, but we do e-alerts. We just did an e-alert as well as tips of the week that just go to members. And those, like the last one we did was on the brand new Department of Labor salary level test increase that we've been waiting on since the end of the Obama administration when it was tabled just prior to the election. So, that was the most recent tip that we did. We will for sure be having a webinar on that topic of the salary level test at sometime this year in the next few months. Today, moving on to what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about FMLA. So we're going to talk about more than just these three boxes, but these are the primary things that we're going to jump at and we're going to focus on. So we're going to talk about who is an employer. And again, for those of you who are at, very large companies that have hundreds or thousands of employees, it's going to be a no-brainer who a covered employer is. You are just always used to being a covered employer for purposes of FMLA. But you never know. You might go to a smaller company sometime in your career, and it's good to know this anyway, especially if you're taking the HRCI or the SHRM credits and you're getting your certification. These are issues that might come up in your certification for compliance. We will talk about that. We'll talk about covered employers. Who is a covered employer? It's not just everybody in the country. It is just, quote, larger employers. And it's a different test than like the ACA might have for what an employer is. We are going to talk about eligible employees. That's a more complicated test. Even if you're an eligible employer, a covered employer, and you have, thousands and thousands of employees, you may not actually, some of your employees might not be eligible for FMLA. Probably a lot of your employees aren't going to be eligible for FMLA. And there are a number of criteria that employees working for you need to meet before they can be considered eligible for FMLA. Then we will talk about the rights that people have, and we will talk about what does FMLA actually provide. What is it? Sometimes with FMLA, I find that it's a forest through the trees type of thing, and we have to just kind of step back and think about what FMLA really is about. How does it differentiate from ADA? How does it differentiate from work comp leave, from paid leave, from unpaid leaves of absence? We just kind of have to step back and think about, like, what does FMLA actually give to employees? Because, lost in like 100 pages of regulations and comments and all that on what the FMLA is and all the decisions and all the legal analysis and all that it provides somebody with time off and the right of reinstatement. I mean, at its core, that's kind of it. And continuation of benefits if you're on group medical. I mean, it's really those three things. Time off. It provides you with time off work, guaranteed that you get returned to your job. That's what it is. It's very different than ADA. ADA doesn't require that. Work comp doesn't require that. So we're going to talk about FMLA rights and just understanding those. Basic stuff on FMLA. It only applies to covered employers. If you have less than 50 employees in your company, you are very likely, not certain. We're going to talk about joint employers in a minute because you might be a joint employer, but more likely than not, if you're a small business with less than 50 employees and you're not using staffing agencies and you're not contracting with third-party vendors to provide employees and you legitimately have less than 50 employees, you are probably not covered by FMLA. Thanks for still being on the call, on the webinar. It's great to have you, and this is good stuff to know, but FMLA probably does not apply to you unless you are a joint employer. If you are not a joint employer and you have less than 50 employees and you're not a school or part of the government, you aren't covered by FMLA. You can tell employees that they don't have any rights to reinstatement after they're off of work. After they need serious health condition or that sort of thing. It is only available to eligible employers. So the first thing that we always need to figure out is, one, are we a covered employer? Are we going to figure that out? Are we a covered employer? We'll look at the test for that in a minute. Two, we're going to look at, is the employee eligible? Totally different analysis. We'll talk about the analysis in a minute. But those are the first two things we got to cover. If they are eligible, if you're a covered employer, and if the employee is eligible, then you pop down to the third thing, which is, okay, is this a situation where the reason for the employee's absence is covered by the FMLA? Not every cold is going to be covered by the FMLA. Just because somebody's sick on the opening day of the NCAA tournament, and they might be sick for a couple more days, just coincidentally during the NCAA tournament, that does not mean that they necessarily are going to meet the criteria, the reasons for triggering FMLA, because FMLA is not available to everybody. Just because somebody needs a mental holiday, a mental break, just because somebody feels like they're a little stressed out at work, that doesn't, and they need some time off to recuperate, or maybe life is stressful for them, whatever. It's not going to mean that they necessarily are entitled to leave under the FMLA. The reasons for the leave are only for these listed on this slide: birth or care for a newborn, placement for adoption or foster care for a spouse, son, daughter, or parent with a serious health condition. It doesn't cover grandparents. If you're going in because your grandparent's going in for hospice care, it's not going to cover you. It's just going to cover spouse, son, daughter, parent. An employee's own serious health condition. So spouse, son, daughter, parent, serious health condition, or the employee's own serious health condition. Again, wanting to watch the NCAA tournament at home, it's not going to be FMLA covered event. Qualifying exigency arising from a spouse, son, daughter, parent's military service in the military. So preparing for somebody to go into the military, or going to events related to going into active duty, that sort of thing. And then the person's own, if your employee is also going into the military. If it's anything outside this, it's not FMLA. You might, as a company, still want to give an unpaid leave of absence, or maybe paid time off or sick leave of some sort might be covered. But if it's not within these reasons right here, it's not going to be covered by the FMLA. So we don't want to call it FMLA. And what does FMLA do at its core? Gives the person 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks per year of time off work, and then reinstatement. So we're going to talk about, we're going to look into that all a little bit deeper here. Still getting a little used to the new format on these webinars, so bear with me. This is only our second month on this new format, so if it's it seems like the slides are a little off, my apologies. It's totally user error on my part. Okay, so covered employers. So let's look at what a covered employer is. I already talked about it. It's somebody with 50 or more employees. How do we measure that? Okay, so say that you're a growing company and that you're on the cusp of becoming 50 or more. You might have just hit it, or you're on your way. You were on your way last year. Okay, so here's what we look at. We look at 50 or more employees. So it could be 50 or more. 50 or more have to have worked for the company for a period of 20 or more calendar weeks in the current or the preceding year. So if you just hit 50 employees like today, you're not suddenly, boom, you're not suddenly FMLA. If you're at 45, but you had 50 or more last year, then you're looking at being in the in FMLA. So this is how we look at it. We look at 50 more, we look at 20 or more calendar weeks. When we talk about employees, when we talk about like what is an employee on the, for a calendar week, what are these 50 employees? They're employees, W-2 employees that are on your payroll. If the person's on your payroll, they're going to count for that week. And we look at just general heads. So if you have 50 new employees every week for whatever reason, you just have 50 new employees every week. That's fine, and you do that for like over 20 weeks in 2018. That's fine. You're going to be covered by FMLA. Now, none of those employees are going to be eligible employees. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we just look at head count. We don't look at individual names themselves. We just look at head count for when we're calculating out this 50 or more employees in the current or the preceding calendar year. Public agencies are always going to be covered. Schools are going to be covered. So if you work at them, at one of those, organizations, then you're going to be covered. Joint employers that meet the joint employer test are going to aggregate with your employees. So we'll move on to the next screen on that. So what is joint employment? So if you personally have less than 50, your company personally has less than 50 employees on the W-2 payroll, then you want to, as good HR people, we want to then look out broader to see, okay, are there contingent workers? Are there staffing? Is there another employer that we're bringing in that we might aggregate their employees to see if we hit 50? And so a joint employer test the Department of Labor would do if they looked at this, or the courts would do if they're looking at this. You're being sued, hopefully not, but you never know. Are you a joint employer? So you would aggregate, it would be you plus any other business, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is that you're working in conjunction with. You would aggregate the businesses, the head count, to see if in aggregate you exceed 50 or more employees. And if you're working with a staffing agency and you're a really small company, but you're working with a staffing agency and they're sending you 60 employees, you're going to be FMLA. They're almost certainly going to aggregate into your population and hit the more than 50. So in that situation, then you will have FMLA. You would be a covered employer. You have to have the poster. So if you are FMLA covered, that's the other thing I should mention that's on any of these slides, that you then have to post all of the FMLA rights. Now you might have, and we'll talk about this in a minute, you might have no eligible employees on FMLA. Doesn't matter. You still need to meet the poster requirements. So your laminated posters should definitely have the FMLA policy on there. You should have an FMLA policy in your handbook or separate from your handbook, but probably in your handbook makes the most sense. But if you are an employer covered by FMLA, you are required by law to notify employees of their rights under FMLA, even if none of those employees are actually ever going to be able to use FMLA because they're not eligible employees. You have a right, employees then have a right, and you would have an obligation in a joint employer situation to follow the FMLA, which gets a little weird, especially when you're talking about staffing agencies. So if you're a covered employer and if the employee goes off on FMLA and they're a staffing agency employee, you might very well say, well, just give me somebody else. I don't care when the person comes back. 12 weeks, like that's an eternity from now. Just give me somebody else in the meantime. Well, the staffing agency might come back and say, okay, 12 weeks later, the person wants their job back. And you as an employer might say, it's not my employee. It's your problem. Deal with it yourself. That's not necessarily appropriate. The FMLA would actually require that as the employer, as part of a joint employment situation, that you would actually have a legal obligation to help the staffing agency, even though it's their direct, technical employee, help the staffing agency place the person back in the job that they had at the time that they left, even though they were a staffing employee with you. And that gets a lot of employers don't like to hear that, but anyway, that's your obligation to do it. Normally, in most, on the ground situations, staffing agencies can find somewhere else for the person to go, and it's not that big of a deal. But I just want you to know that in a joint employer situation, even though it might technically not be your employee, you do have obligations under the FMLA to still provide and not to retaliate against the person, and to help to reinstate them. So when we look at who's primary and who's secondary on here, we look at to try to figure this out. Who's primary? Who has the authority to hire and fire? Who determines how the employee is paid? Who provides the leave and the benefits. And in a staffing agency type of situation, it's almost always going to be the staffing agency, though the authority to hire and fire might be more of a mixed bag with the company itself that's receiving the benefit from the staffing agency employee having some sort of say in hiring and firing. If you are the primary employer, and in most situations, primary employer in a joint employment situation, or in just I have 1,000 employees and I'm the primary employer. So what are most of you on this call are going to be considered primary employers. If you are covered by the FMLA, you're most likely going to be primary employers. It's going to be the nuanced staffing agency type of situation where you might be a secondary employer. So primary employers, what is your responsibility? You need to give required notices to all employees. Those are the laminated posters. You need to have an FMLA policy on the books, distributed to employees. Handbook is probably the most likely way to do that, but you don't have to have a handbook. It could just be a policy. You need to provide FMLA leave to eligible employees when the FMLA criteria is all met. But as a general proposition, if the person's covered, if you're covered, and if the person is eligible for FMLA, you need to provide FMLA leave. You need to maintain, if there's group medical, only if there's group medical, you need to maintain group medical insurance during the amount of the leave. FMLA does not give the person an opportunity to opt in at that point to your group benefits. But if at the time when they take the FMLA leave, if they are on your group medical, they have a right to continue. Now, you have a right also to be paid for that. That's a totally different, a more nuanced matter. We're going to look more at those type of situations next month. I also do have a scenario, so at the end of this webinar that touches on that. But it's not a freebie, so you can continue while the person's on the group medical coverage. You are expected to continue to provide them with the group medical at the same benefit level. So with the same company premium or organization premium that you pay for all employees who are active employees while on FMLA. This is very different. This is what FMLA gives to people versus if somebody takes a sabbatical or an unpaid leave of absence or even goes on military leave. You don't need to continue group medical benefits for those people when they're in those types of situations. It's only the FMLA that requires that you continue medical benefits during the period of the leave. You are required to restore the person to the same or the equivalent job. That is a very tight test. Same or equivalent. It's not a different shift. If somebody's working first shift and you only have an opening on second shift because you had to fill their job because you couldn't, because it was 12 weeks and that's just way too long, you need to replace it doesn't matter. You're going to need to displace somebody and return them to the first shift. Same pay, same shift, same basic job. Now, if outside of the FMLA things happened, because that's how business works sometimes, and you had layoffs, you had reductions in wages, you had changes in benefits. Well, if with all ships rising or falling, the people on the FMLA can also go up or down with the same ships rising and falling, or whatever. Terrible analogy, but metaphor. But the point is that if changes that are happening to the workforce are occurring, then in that situation, the same changes would occur to the person on FMLA, regardless of the fact that they're on FMLA. We'll talk about that a little bit more, scenarios like that in the advanced next month. You have to maintain records. There are 3 primary forms that we use with the FMLA. It's the notification of rights and responsibilities. These are all Department of Labor issued forms. They're on the department. If you Google search DOL FMLA forms, it'll be the first link. There's the Department of Labor. There's the notification of rights and responsibilities form. There's the medical certification form, and there's the designation notice. Anybody who's on FMLA for you, at a minimum, needs to have the notification of rights and responsibilities completed and filed for them, given to them, and then placed in their medical file, their medical or leave of absence file, not in their personnel file. Because it potentially has PHI on it, and we don't want to do that for HIPAA reasons. And then there also needs to be a designation form, and the designation form will designate whether in other circumstances, whether they're qualified for the FMLA leave, when it began, when it ends, and other stipulations, conditions regarding reinstatement. That also needs to be filed in the leave of absence medical file for the employees, and obviously given to the employees as well. But you are required to maintain those records. You are prohibited from interfering with employees. So if you find out that the person needs to go on FMLA and then they want to come back, you are prohibited as a primary employer from saying no, from interfering with their rights to take FMLA. Okay, and then you need to make sure that the secondary employer doesn't violate laws as well. Okay. Secondary employer, there's going to be fewer situations where you are a secondary employer. But generally, the secondary employer doesn't have as many obligations under the FMLA as the primary employer. But what they do have the obligation of not interfering and not retaliating against. So not interfering with somebody who wants to take FMLA, so discouraging them, somehow denying them FMLA leave that is covered. And then also from retaliating against employees who take the FMLA. So if they try to come back, you should not be discriminating against them, prohibiting them from coming back. You also have to keep basic data, but you don't have as much responsibility on posting the notices and also of maintaining like the designation notice and the notification of rights and responsibilities, as well as the medical certification. Okay, I saw Captain Marvel when it came out, and I really, really liked it. And I think so there's a little Marvel thing here. That's my but I didn't want to get into copyright trademark issues. So anyway, so we're not gonna use cartoon. We don't want to cross Disney on this. So we've got Colonel Marvel. So for all of 2018, Colonel Marvel Corporation. We're gonna pretend that's a company, employed 15 people in Massachusetts, 10 people in Illinois, and 30 employees in Texas. For those of you that are not math literate, that is 55 employees in aggregate. Okay, are they a covered employer? Yes. Covered employer, 15 plus 10 plus 30 is 55. And so they are a covered employer. That is all of 2018, which is more than 20 weeks in the calendar year of 2018. Covered employer, absolutely, there it is. In February 2019, CMC, Colonel Marvel Corporation, sold its Illinois operations, leaving it with 45 employees. Still a covered employer? Yes. Still a covered employer because 2018 they were a covered employer. So still all the obligations, they don't just suddenly drop off of FMLA. They don't have 20 or more in 2019, but they do have it. They do have it in the preceding year of 2018. So we're still looking at CMC being a covered employer in 2019, even though they've dropped below this 45 threshold. What if CMC only ever had 30 employees, but contracts with Deadpool Industries, one of my favorite cartoon characters, comic book characters, to provide staffing solutions to Deadpool Industries? Deadpool Industries has 15 employees. Covered employer, that's 55 for those of you, again, that are not great at math. Actually, that's 45. Oh my God, I'm the person that's really, really terrible at math. So anyway, that's bad on me. Deadpool Industries, covered employer. No, it's still under 40. It's still under 45, and this is in a situation where they had 55 in 2018. So they're not covered even in aggregate with Deadpool, which has provided 15 employees. So we're still under the 45 threshold. If Deadpool had provided 30 employees, you'd be at 60. Then in that situation, assuming that they hit the 20 calendar weeks, then covered, yes, they would be covered in that situation, but that's not our scenario. But in this scenario, no, they're not covered as a joint employer. Okay, moving on to eligible employees. More complicated tests. So the 50 or more, it's I think it's fairly easy, although it gets a little complicated with the joint employer. Then we look at, so that's the first test. Are we a covered employer? Second test, is the employee eligible for the FMLA? And here's how we figured out eligibility. We ask ourselves this: has this employee worked 12 or more months for the company? And it's got to be 12 or more in the last 7 years. They changed that about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, 2000. Okay, yeah, no, it's been a while. Anyway, so did they work for the company for 12 months ever? Aggregate, maybe it's 2 months at a time, over 6 years, whatever it is. Did they work at least 12 months? If the answer is yes, we move on. Did they then, second question, did the employee work at least 12 months before taking the leave, measured when the leave begins? So if somebody announces, hey, I'm going to have a baby in 3 months, I'm going to need some FMLA, you would actually measure from when the employee is telling you that they are going to need the leave. Now, it might be a moving target because of pregnancy, but outside of pregnancy, for the most part, it's normally not a moving target. You normally know when like the surgery is going to be or something like that. But we look at the day that the leave begins. What is the first day that person is going to be gone? And we look back 12 months and we measure and we count all their hours worked. And did they hit 1,250? And if the answer is no, they're not going to have 1,250 hours. I don't care if you have 10,000 employees. You are not that you're a covered employer, but the employee is not going to be eligible. So you can deny their FMLA. They got to be 12 months. They have to be 1,250 hours in the previous 12 months. Final question that we ask is, does the employer, do you as the employer, have 50 or more employees within 75 miles radius of the employee? So are there coworkers, are there at least 50 or 49, I guess, but 50 in total, including the employee, are there at least 50 employees within a 75-mile radius? Again, you might have 10,000 employees around the world, around the country, wherever. But if this employee is out in the middle of nowhere and there are like 15 employees within 75 miles and all the other employees are elsewhere in the country, then they're not going to be eligible. They're not going to meet the eligibility. You could be the biggest company in the world, but if you have an outlying region and you don't have 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius, that employee is not going to be eligible. So it's got to meet all three of these criteria. All three have to be met before the employee is going to be an eligible employee under the FMLA. So a few things to know about eligibility. One thing, and this sounds rudimentary, it actually comes up a lot. Working time. The 1,250 hours, it's got to be working time. So when we're going to go back and we're going to look, so when the person asks for leave, let's just say they ask for leave today. Today's the 21st of March, okay? The person's, we're going to call it the NCAA flu. And they're like, I foresee that I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks, okay? So they're going to be gone on the NCAA flu. You look back today, you look back 365 days, one full year, and you add up all the hours that they worked. Now it's got to be actual work, paid time off, vacation, military leave, work comp, all the reasons, anything but quote work, like actual physically coming in and working in the office or at home, if that's the situation, but actually logging in working hours, only those hours are going to count. Just like we look at that for overtime purposes, right? When we calculate overtime, we only look at work hours over 40, like it doesn't include PTO and holiday pay and vacations and all that. Same with FMLA. We only look at physical actual work. And if they don't have 1,250, you can decline they're not eligible, and you can decline their request for FMLA leave. Internal classifications don't mean anything to me. So if you call somebody full-time, I don't really care. We want to look at 1,250 hours. We want to look at the 12 months. We want to look at if they've got 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. You could call somebody full-time, they could work 80 hours a week. But if they took several months of FMLA leave for another situation and they didn't work and they don't hit the 1,250 hours, they're not going to be counted. They're not going to meet the 1,250. So we literally do need to go through and count the amount of time that the person actually works. Counting the 1 year requirement, I had mentioned it already. It has to be within. It can be spread out, but spread out over a 7 year period. The only time where we can extend that 7 year period is if the person's on active duty military leave. That will extend the 7 year period. And I have found that this situation has only come up a couple times with counting the 1 year requirement, but I wanted to mention it to people. The 50 or more employees, we want to look at 50 or more employees on the payroll, but it also includes joint employment situations. So it could also include staffing agencies. So again, when we look at this 50 or more coworkers, 50 or more employees within just a 75-mile radius, we're not looking at it for 20 work weeks. We're looking at literally at the time when the person needs the leave. Are there 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius? If yes, if they meet the 1,250, if they meet the 1 year, they're going to be eligible employees. Scenario 2. Neander has worked for your company for a long time. In 2018, he took 12 weeks of time for FMLA, several weeks for vacation, and you accommodated his extended absence due to complicates. Sorry about that. Due to complications with his medical procedure for FMLA. He now has cancer and needs surgery. That's too bad. You have counted the hours looking back 12 months, and as of today, it's 1,120. But it'll be 1,160 when he needs time off for the surgery. Is he eligible? No, he's not eligible. If he asks today and you're at 1,120, or what if the FMLA in 2019 is the same for the medical issue he needed in 2018, but he doesn't meet the 1,250 hours requirement? This will come up in the complicated thing next month, but we will talk about situations where you can re-examine the eligibility especially for chronic conditions under the FMLA. And basically every time somebody asks for FMLA for a situation, you are going to assess their eligibility for it. Now, there is a situation where you would only assess their eligibility one time per year in a chronic leave situation, but for the most part, in this situation where he's had some time off and he had some FMLA, but now you're doing the counting and you're finding out that he doesn't hit the 1,250 threshold. So even though it might be for the same a new thing, he's got a new event, you can deny him. So even though you might have approved him for FMLA for some sort of other situation in 2018, you look back, 2019, now he has cancer, now he needs surgery. It might be an entirely legitimate reason for FMLA, but if he doesn't hit the 1,250, you don't want to give him the FMLA. If you want to give him time off, give him unpaid leave of absence, call it something else, call it whatever you want to call it, don't call it FMLA. If you call it FMLA, then the federal government and the courts say that you need to start treating the person like it's FMLA. And so even if they're not eligible, even if you're not covered, even if it's not a medical situation that would make the person eligible for FMLA, you still in that situation, if you call it FMLA and designate it as FMLA, even if they don't meet the criteria, you are then stuck with having to give the employee all the rights. So if in this situation you've got Neander and he doesn't meet the criteria, you're going to deny the FMLA, but you know, Neander's a good employee and you just don't want to be that type of employer that denies somebody leave of absence because of cancer. That's great for you, I guess. And you're a nice employer. In that situation, and you want to give them the leave, call it something else. Call it cancer leave. I don't care, but call it something, I kind of care, but call it something non-discriminatory and just like unpaid leave of absence, and give it to them. Different than FMLA. You don't want to convey the rights of FMLA onto somebody that is not eligible unless you are just making a business decision that that's how you want to do it to maintain continuity among your offices. And a lot of larger companies that are spread out over the country, they do that. So that's in fact, I think Thompson Co., my firm, even does that. So it's very, very common to maintain continuity by just extending FMLA to everybody. As even on at least on the 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. Okay, so we figured out if the company is a covered employer, and then we've figured out if the employee is eligible. That doesn't automatically mean that they get to take time off for the NCAA flu. If they want to take the time off, then we look at what is the reason for the time off, right? So this is our third level of analysis. Why do you need the time off? This is where things get more complicated. Serious health condition is the one that we are going to deal with the most, in my experience, in HR practice. We are going to deal with people who are sick and people who just need time off for surgery or whatever it is. To have a serious health condition, what is it going to be? It's an illness, injury, impairment, or physical or mental condition that involves inpatient care or continuing treatment, right? So it's going to be one of these two things. Let's look at what continuing treatment is. That's the more common that we're going to see. An incapacity of more than 3 full calendar days, okay? NCAA flu starts today. Today's Thursday. It continues to Friday. It continues on Saturday. It continues on Sunday. Lo and behold, the person's back on Monday. Great. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 calendar days. Did you go see a doctor? It's got to be treatment of 2 or more times in the first 30 days of the incapacity. Yep. Went to a doctor, went to a minute clinic, and got a special flu shot and some Gatorade to watch the games and peanuts or whatever. Treatment of 2 or more times within 30 days of the first incapacity. If the employee doesn't meet all of these criteria, you can deny the reason for their leave. Or it could be treatment once by a healthcare provider. Go into the minute clinic, they give me some sort of medication, whatever to deal with my NCAA flu. Okay. Or it could be treatment of 2 or more times. So either one. There's a definition of incapacity. This is the other thing. The treatment needs to be sought within the first 7 days of the incapacity. So if you leave today, you're gone off work for the NCAA flu, and you are gone tomorrow, and you are gone Saturday, and you are gone Sunday, and you don't go into the doctor, and you don't go into the doctor for over a week, and then you go in after over a week, and you're like, oh, that NCAA flu, oh, it's coming back again next Thursday. Okay, Thursday, Friday, next week as well. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, another 4 days. And you come back after missing Thursday and Friday, 2 weeks in a row. And you're like, ugh, NCAA flu, it's totally getting me. And then as a good HR person, you're like, okay, well, first of all, as a good HR person, you should have already given them the notification of rights and responsibilities. You're required to do that before a week goes by. But you give it to them, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, no, I didn't bother to go into the into the doctor." Okay, so they haven't been treated by a healthcare provider. They don't have a continuing regimen of care. The treatment needs to be sought within 7 days of the incapacity. The first day of the incapacity is today, March 21st. You've got 7 days to go to a doctor to get some sort of treatment. First, right? If it's going to be treatment or 2 more times, the second one's going to be within the next 30 days from when the first incapacity occurred. But we need to make sure if the employee doesn't do it, I don't care how sick they are, if they don't do this treatment within the first 7 days, and they don't get either a continuing regimen of care or go back to the doctor again, and if they don't need more than 3 full calendar days off of incapacity, they're not going to have a serious health condition. If they're bad one day, they could have the worst cold in the whole world, and they're gone for 2 days, and they're back after the 3rd day, and it just lasted 2 days. That's not a serious health condition. They need to have more than 3 days. Now, how could it also be a serious health condition? It could be a permanent situation. Somebody might have epilepsy. Somebody might have, Alzheimer's. That's a permanent or a long-term chronic type of condition. It could be something that's permanent, a permanent incapacity, which requires some sort of treatment. Okay, those, going in for the treatment, missing time off work because of the long-term condition, that's going to be also covered as a serious health condition. A chronic condition, have to go to the doctor at least 2 years. So if somebody's got epilepsy, for example, they're going to have to go to the doctor at least 2 years. Chronic condition is going to be over a long period of time. It's going to be very different than the NCAA flu. A chronic condition might be allergies. Chronic condition might be epilepsy. Chronic condition might be, any one of the, diseases or conditions that people have. And so it's going to be long. It's going to be long term, and they might need some time off. And you can continue to ask for medical certifications at least every 6 months for those people. Okay, let's talk about scenario 3. Sorry to entice everybody with this bread. Hopefully you're all eating lunch right now. Kay is sick, and by the way, the names for these they all come from my one of my favorite movies, Blade Runner 2049. Okay, so Kay is the main character in Blade Runner 2049. Just in case if anybody actually caught that, that's fantastic. Feel free to call me. We can nerd out someday on Blade Runner. Okay, so Kay is sick, goes to the hospital and tells the nurse how sick he is. She prescribes him a regimen of aspirin followed by hot chicken soup. Kay follows instructions and is back after 4 days off work. And during that time, he was incapacitated, right? Couldn't work. Serious medical condition. Okay, so he's sick, so got that. K is an employee. Okay, so that's good. Goes to the hospital. Okay, seeks treatment within the first 7 days. We're just going to, sounds like it was within the first 7 days. And prescription of aspirin. Okay, good enough. There it is. Aspirin, continuing regimen of care. That is continued treatment. 4 days off. Yep, that's 4 is more than 3. So 4 days off, comes back on the 5th day. Serious medical condition. Yes. Okay. What if K gets sick on Thursday at work? So let's just like today, goes to the doctor that evening. So tonight, receives some medication and is back on Monday. So let's see, we've got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We would want to ask K when K got better, right? So 4 days, that's still 4 days. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but K's at work on Thursday, so he's not really incapacitated. So we've probably really got incapacity because he couldn't work on Friday. So we've got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, back on Monday, not incapacitated 3 days, right? So we've got 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of, and he might have gotten better over the weekend, but at a maximum, he's got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 days. 3 is not more than 4. Sorry for all the math today. 3 is not more than 4. Therefore, not a potential serious medical condition. Now, you might give K time off because of your sick leave policies or something like that, but you're not going to designate the time off that K took as FMLA because it was not in excess of 4 days, of 3 days, even though K went to the doctor and might have been super sick. It doesn't matter. It wasn't more than 3 days. Let's look at the time frame. Moving on. So you have K or any of these people, and they are coming to you and they are saying, okay, K comes back on Monday, says, oh, super sick, I'm back at work. Okay, you found out that on Friday that because K didn't show up for work, just giving this example here, that K needed FMLA. Okay, so what is your responsibility? You are going to go to if you don't have the form, go to DOL FMLA forms and pull the notification of rights and responsibilities. You have 5 business days to get that to K. So Friday, you've got 5 business days from Friday to fill out and get the notification of rights and responsibilities to K. Now, the notification of rights and responsibilities, and again, next month we will look into these with more detail, but the notification of rights and responsibilities is going to basically say that, that these are all the rights that you have, and that we are going to conditionally put you on FMLA as of Friday, first day of absence, right? It's not going to be Thursday because he worked on Thursday. FMLA is a time off work law. So we would start it from Friday. So you would say, conditionally absent beginning on Friday, and then you would say that the person needs to turn in K in this situation, the medical certification, which is your second form from the Department of Labor, turn in the medical certification within 15 calendar days. Now, that's the employee's responsibility, and the employee doesn't get to argue that the doctor didn't do it, or the doctor ate my paper or something like that. It is the employee's responsibility whether the doctor does it or not. But you need to get the medical certification within 15 days. Based on the medical certification, you would then make a determination as to whether or not it is a serious health condition. Now, it could be a chronic condition or something, or impairment, but for most of these, we're talking about serious health conditions. And so you're going to base that decision on the medical certification that you get. So you've got 5 days to kick out the notice, 15 days. You give the employee 15 days from when they receive the notice to turn back the medical certification. And on the medical certification, you should mark what the consequences are. And the consequence might be that the reinstatement is going to be delayed, or that the person's request for FMLA might be delayed or denied, which is a problem if somebody misses a bunch of work, especially if they take the full 15 days and they've missed like 2 or more weeks of work, and then suddenly they don't turn in the medical certification, and then suddenly the time off work that they've been taking, the conditional approval turns into a denial. And when do you do that? You do the denial within after Next slide. You do the denial within 5 days of when you receive the medical certification. And so if you deny, then you retroactively look at the person's employment and they've missed like 2 or 3 weeks potentially of work, all unexcused absences. You might fire the person under your attendance policy. That's how FMLA works. So 5 days to kick out from when you receive notice that the person might have taken an FMLA leave and they're eligible and you're a covered employer. And then you give them 15 days on the medical certification to turn the medical certification in. There's some authentication and clarification issues. We will talk about that more next month. And then you have, from when you receive the medical certification, you then have 5 business days to issue the employee a notice. And again, all of these are going to go into your leave of absence file, your medical files. And the designation notice either says, yes, you are designated for FMLA, retroactive to such and such date, when the leave first began, and then it might say like when it's going to go through, and if the person's not going to be back for a while. So that's the flow of the notices, and every FMLA situation you should have these forms. Now, in some medical certification, again, we'll talk about that more next month, but the medical certification is optional. That is up to you whether you want to use the medical certification. You should not be using it in pregnancy situations. For the most part, it's best HR practice to use medical certifications with employees, except when it comes down to like bonding leave. When I say pregnancy, I mean bonding leave. If there's a complication with the pregnancy, it's a medical issue, then you should do the medical certification. But if it's for bonding leave for one of the parents, then you really shouldn't be doing the medical certification. Okay, so moving on to employee rights. So here are the rights that employees have, right? They get continued insurance, continued group medical insurance. They get job reinstatement. We've talked about all this a little bit at the beginning of the webinar. You can't interfere. You can't retaliate against them. And they get up to 12 weeks off per year. And how you measure a year is something we will look at next month. But you get up to 12 weeks off, whether it's a rolling year or a calendar year basis. They get 12 weeks. They don't get more. Courts are very clear that employees don't get more than 12 weeks. Reinstatement. You might have a condition. You might place a condition on the person coming back to work that requires a fitness for duty that needs to be marked on the designation notice. You can't just willy-nilly say to somebody, if you don't notify them on the designation notice, that they need to do a fitness for duty. It is important that you mark that box on the designation notice. Fitness for duties are something we generally want to see done for certain positions across the board for all people in that position. So especially if it's a safety sensitive job or a job that requires, lifting, bending, that sort of thing, and the person's taking a serious medical condition, you might require just across the board that in order to return to work, they need to provide a fitness for duty. And until they do provide it, you can delay their reinstatement. That's okay. It is okay that you delay their reinstatement if you have a legitimate fitness for duty requirement. If you reinstate them, it needs to be into the same or equivalent position. We don't want to mess around with this. I know that's really hard sometimes, especially after somebody's been gone a bunch, especially if they're taking their full 12 weeks of leave and you've replaced them and they come back and you're like, well, I mean, I've got a similar job for you, but the person that I replaced you with is fantastic and we love them and we want them to continue to work. You might have to get rid of that person that you love or move them somewhere else. The person on FMLA has a right to reinstatement to their job. If everybody got across the board wage increases, like 2%, 3%, whatever it is, while the person was out on leave, that person, upon returning, should also have their leave, their wage increased to the same level that everybody else did. If their job, however, was eliminated, you had a reduction and they were going to be fired whether they were on FMLA or not, can you fire them? Do they have an absolute right of reinstatement? No, they don't have an absolute right of reinstatement. If they would have been eliminated, if they would have been disciplined, sometimes you find out that the person was doing a lot of mistakes when they were, because like you're looking at their computer, you're looking at their emails now that they're gone, and you're like, oh my gosh, they screwed up the TPS reports. They really messed this up. Can you discipline the person while they're on FMLA? Yes. Can you fire the person while they're on FMLA? Yes. You want to be pretty careful about it. Definitely engage legal counsel to make sure you're doing it correctly. But there is not an absolute right of reinstatement. It is just generally there is a rule of reinstatement to an equivalent position, but there are circumstances that would provide an exception on that. Okay, we're going to go through some scenarios and then we're going to be done. Joy has another character from Blade Runner. Okay, Joy has been working for you for 2 years. She was working in your corporate office alongside 100 other people. A month ago, she then transferred to a remote office with 10 coworkers. She then has a heart attack and needs to be hospitalized and recover for at least 16 weeks. Is she eligible? No, she's not eligible. Why is she not eligible? Well, heart attack is definitely a serious health condition. So, she's going to get inpatient treatment. That's going to be that. You have over 100 employees. You're a covered employer, right? So we look at the analysis. 100 or more employees, check. You're a covered employer. Joy, she's been working for you for 10 years. So she's got the 12 months in the last 7 years. Check. 1,250 hours. Let's just assume that I didn't put that in there, but let's just assume that she worked 1,250 hours for you. 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius? Nope. Doesn't look like she did. Like she's got that met. So is she eligible? No, she's not eligible. Just because she worked previously at a larger office with 50 or more within a 75-mile radius, that doesn't transfer over to her at the new office because she legitimately transferred to a remote office with only 10 coworkers. So you could deny her request for hospitalization. In this situation, it's a heart attack. I don't want to get too complicated on this, but you may have to look at the ADA and think about 16 weeks as a potential accommodation. That's outside the scope of this webinar, but just to let you know. Finish the train of thought. It could be a potential ADA issue. Okay, let's just assume that you're a larger employer, and for consistency purposes, you want to give everybody, you're going to consider the 50 or more employees thing. You're going to just assume you're going to give that to everybody. And you're really only going to look at whether they've worked for you for a year, and you're only going to look at whether or not they hit the 1,250. Okay, that's very common. So let's just assume that happened. How much FMLA might she receive? She only gets 12 weeks. Okay. She needs 16 weeks, doesn't matter. So you're going to give her 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, you then have to make a decision whether or not you can accommodate her. If you're going to look at ADA issues for another 4 weeks, you might put her on some sort of unpaid leave of absence until she can return. But she only gets 12 weeks. You might need to COBRA her, right? So she's got the benefits beginning. She's on group medical. We'll just say she's on group medical. That would continue for the 12 weeks of the FMLA, and then it would cut off after that's done. So you might need to issue her COBRA. Do you need to reinstate her? In this situation, you don't, because she needs 16 weeks, and the ADA doesn't hold the job open in the same manner. And again, that's outside the scope of this webinar. But if she returns after 12 weeks, you would need to reinstate her to the same or the equivalent position. But because it's returning after 16 weeks, you would want to communicate to her that that same entitlement does not hold true. So even if you're going to give her an unpaid leave of absence, best practice is to tell her that you will try to reinstate her into the same or equivalent job, but that there are no guarantees. Yoshi missed work on Monday and Tuesday. She came in on Wednesday and says, surprise, I'm okay. She tells you that she was sick Saturday through Tuesday. So Saturday, 1, 2, 3, 4 days, but it's better now. Thanks for asking. You ask her to justify her absence. She shows you a doctor note. Yoshi was under my care. What recourse do you have? So in this situation, you're going to kick out the notification. You've got 5 days to kick out the notice of rights and responsibilities. You probably, you're finding this out on Wednesday. And so you've got 5 days to kick it out. The doctor's note doesn't give somebody FMLA, right? You're going to give them the medical certification. You're going to have her doctor complete it, and you're going to have the doctor or Yoshi return it within 15 days. At that point, once you receive that, let's just say it's all good, and the doctor says, yeah, she's under my care. She was sick, NCAA flu. It was pretty nasty, more than 3 days. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 4 days before it's more than 3. And then you're going to, let's just assume it all works out. You're going to then do the designation notice, designate that as covered by FMLA. And so Monday and Tuesday would be covered under the FMLA, and that's 2 days less than the 12 weeks. And I would do it even though it's only 2 days, because you just never know. So anytime the person can take FMLA, you want them to take FMLA. You should be designating everything as FMLA that's eligible for FMLA, even if it's 1, 2, 3, 4 days, that sort of thing. That's best HR practice. And it comes back to haunt people all the time when they just let it slide and don't designate things as FMLA, because invariably Yoshi will need like 10 or 15 or 12 weeks or whatever later on during the year. But the main point here is, in and of itself, the doctor's note means nothing. You have the right to ask for the medical certification and then designate it as FMLA. Okay, 1 o'clock. Thanks for all of your attention on this. A lot of forecasting to next month's webinar. It'll be FMLA for Geniuses. This was the FMLA for Basics. Feel free to give me a ring or shoot me an email with any questions that you might have on the webinar and the presentation. I appreciate your attendance. I am really looking forward to next month's on April 19th. I hope everybody can make it. If you are on the myHRgenius program, you may watch this. You may watch this webinar. It's been recorded and will be made available on our website. Thanks for your attention.